Here's how old I am. I'm so old that I remember being asked to leave restaurants in New York and Boston because I was wearing slacks. That's what we called pants back then. I'm so old that I remember when a certain Ivy League club here in the city had a special side door called the ladies' entrance. It was there because women weren't allowed in the front door. And somehow, it never crossed our minds to even question that. And here's an ad-lib. I'm so old that in my whole long life, I've only slept with one person. Are you ready for that? I'm old enough to remember, too, that back in 1959, when my husband, the rocket scientist, who was spending his days designing rockets at MIT, suddenly decided he would like to take a graduate seminar in something called Turing machines. Why? Because he'd heard that digitization was the coming thing, and also because courses were free for employees. You may have heard of Alan Turing, that publicly disgraced gay Englishman who broke the Enigma code and, along the way, became the man who invented the computer. It's conjectured that he also committed suicide by eating a poisoned apple. In fact, there's actually a rumor that Steve Jobs' salute to Turing is the Apple logo. You know, that apple with the bite taken out of it? So, well, back to my husband. That's the guy I slept with, of course. He began his course in Turing machines that September with September enthusiasm, but by December, he was feeling a distinct December chill. He was going to drop the course, he said, because I just don't get the point. All they talk about are all those ones and zeros. It's kind of boring. And that's how the Prisants didn't get into computers in the 1950s. Okay, so I remember an evening in the mid-1970s, too, when we were invited to dinner by some highly intellectual friends who were anxious to show us their brand new home computer. We arrived and we were ushered into a small, unfurnished room, and there it sat, enthroned on a vinyl-top card table. I thought it was a cute little thing, actually. I liked its calm gray screen, its soft focus, white lettering, very soft focus, actually, and most especially, its standalone canted keyboard. It looked really businesslike, I thought. I wasn't sure what one did with it, of course, although neither was our host, evidently. He kind of waffled on what he was planning to use it for, but he did enthuse at length on how totally brilliant it was that his wife had taught herself to store recipes on it. We were on our way home when my husband finally delivered himself of what he thought, and it went like this. Why would anyone ever want a home computer? It just doesn't really do anything, does it? And that's why the Prisants weren't into computers in the 1970s. By 1982, however, we were majorly into them. Our son had come home from college for spring break of his senior year, and while we were all sitting around a pizza one evening, he broached the subject. How on earth was he going to earn a living with a degree in art history? Maybe some of you have been there. And how was it that none of us had ever considered this? So talking long into the night, we inevitably got around to computers because by 1982, everyone was talking about computers. Well, our son was kind of a techie too, so couldn't he do something with that? Now, full disclosure, it took me a good half hour and both men taking turns to explain to me what computers actually were and what they actually did besides storing recipes. Because I'm a little slow with numbers, starting with ones and zeros. And yet, the more we talked, the more we found ourselves coming back to that information storage thing. Could that work with art somehow? It felt almost sacrilegious, but then all of a sudden, like a proverbial bolt from the blue or Archimedes' bathtub, it came to us almost simultaneously that, hey, you could store auction results in computers. Because weren't innocent little auction results lying around the world for things, auction result for things like painting and prints and watercolors and drawings and sculptures? Weren't they just lying around there, just waiting to be shown and made sense of to someone, say, in Arizona or Maine or Montana, who'd bought or inherited a painting, signed, for example, and let's go big on this, Georgia O'Keeffe. The way it was back then, this fortunate individual had no simple way of discovering what her O'Keeffe was worth, no easy way of finding out what it was bringing in New York or LA or London. So what we would do, my son and I, was offer everyone who dialed our 800 number, which was also a novelty then, what we would do was offer them every artist's sales result by phone and or in print. My years in the antiques and appraising world fit really nicely into our venture, so I became vice president of our about-to-be-formed database company. And our newly hatched son, and a man, of course, would be our president. Pretty much overnight then, I learned to type DOS on my very own pale gray screen. DOS was what IBM called its 1981 disk operating system. And equally overnight, I found myself an officer of the first mother-son mother-son art database company. Wait. Actually, if you leave out the mother-son part, we were the first art database company, period. And the best decision we ever made was to take out ads in, I'm sorry, Majora, the New York Times. These ads were to let people know, let readers know that they could phone us, describe the work of art they wanted to know about, and for a mere $15, paid for on a credit card, they would receive instant professionally interpreted comparables. Well, the Wall Street Journal loved us, as did Business Week. The Christian Science Monitor loved us, and the New York Post. Well, the New York Post was so casually inaccurate about our ages that I learned that I had given birth to my son when I was 14. For those of you who read the Post, I just pass it along. Despite such glitches, the business flourished, and today, drum roll, 36 years later, our son is still appraising art, often in person these days, worldwide, while I, on the other hand, have moved on to to be honest, my Cinderella editor's job, which is such a joy that I need to give a shout out here to the word processor. That oft-neglected feature of every computer we love to hate. Because along with the fact that I'm still 18 years old mentally, and people, it'll happen to you. My manual dexterity is that of a 4-year-old, so I couldn't have typed this big thing without it. And so, as I think I might have mentioned earlier, I'm old. In fact, I've been a widow and a grandmother for quite a while now. Those are two nouns that even sound old, don't you think? Grandmother, widow. Ooh. But in case you're supposing that I don't participate in the dubious joys of social networking, and let me reassure you that I, too, am on Facebook. I've been on Instagram once or twice. Wait, and I even have a website. Not only that, but I didn't hear all these people when I was writing this, but here it comes. I'll confess that over the past several years, I've shopped. And yes, I think of it as shopping on most of the dating apps. Not Tinder. Sadly, I've discovered that there seems to be one interesting man in every 100, and I'll bet you're not surprised at that. But lately, with the cohort of age-appropriate men dwindling, and actually, I'm not even sure that there are 500 men over 80 left. And most of those, I'll bet, and I want to tell you, they're doorknobs. Let me explain. An old friend told me that she liked inviting me to her dinner parties because you can talk to a doorknob. I think she meant it as a compliment. But now that I'm single, I've discovered that spending lots of time in the company of doorknobs is teaching me more than I ever wanted to know about alimony and offshore accounts. Not to mention Tom Brady's stats. And yet, just last month, via one of those dating apps, I had 2 non-virtual dates. The first, okay, that was a mild disappointment. And I know you've been there. But the other one turned out to be a 6'8" Rhodes Scholar who, as it happens, is a descendant of Richard III's cousin. The one who broke his word and didn't show up at Bosworth Field with his vassals and his knights. Or a horse. And guess what? Last week, he and I went to that very same Ivy League club for dinner. And you'll be pleased to know that I walked through the front door because I'm allowed to now, thanks to all of you. And I paid for our excellent meal. And by the way, I wore pants.